Hi everyone and welcome back to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And we're talking today about the hand in waistcoat pose. We introduced this yesterday and you'll often see it in older kind of 1700s, 18th century portraits of, men, of noble men, of kings and generals and leaders with one hand in their waistcoat.
I also find it's a great way to kind of just rest your arm.
Yeah, just hang it there.
Suddenly my arm feels so much less tired than it used to. And now I got to put it up here. And of course, this pose came about a long time ago at the time of a conflict between the UK and France. So this is the late...
One of the many.
One of the many, but this is the one from the late 1700s to the 1800s, and of course there's one person that we're going to find out was very famous for this pose, but it was actually the English people, or the British people, who kind of invented it. It says French people back then were considered to have a flamboyant character, kind of showing off and showing how rich they are with their fancy clothes and all the paintings. And this pose, the hand in waistcoat pose, was thought to be more respectable, more loyal, less sort of show off,
as well.
A little quieter, a little less proud. And that, at the time, for British people said, see, this is how we're different from those fancy French with all their big wigs and perfume.
Despite this, though, Napoleon, the French emperor, is very often seen in pictures with that pose.
He stole that pose from the British. Sacre bleu.
But others, including George Washington and Karl Marx and Joseph Stalin, that pose has continued to be popular and used by leaders over time. So today we're going to learn about some ideas people have about what this pose actually means, but also the very early origin of where it comes from.
Okay.
So let's go back in time by starting today's article.
Reading.
The story behind the famous hand in waistcoat pose. We now know that the hand in waistcoat pose is a classy pose intended to impress people. But where did it come from? Despite becoming popular in the 18th century, the conclusion is that it was first used in the classical period. Aeschines, an orator, claimed that people who spoke with their arm outside their tunic were rude. It's likely that 18th century artists borrowed this idea. There are other thoughts on its origins too, though these are believed to be false. One theory is that a Freemason may put their hands onto their heart. This discreetly signals that they're a member of the Freemasons. Another is that one famous English painter, Thomas Hudson, wasn't very good at drawing hands, so he hid them. This isn't probable because Hudson wasn't the only painter to use the hand in waistcoat pose. The hand in waistcoat pose shows how old styles can come back in fashion. Maybe this pose will be next year's Instagram craze.
All right, so the first part of our first sentence kind of covers what we learned yesterday, and then we finish with an interesting question. So it reads, we now know that the hand in waistcoat pose is a classy pose intended to impress people, right? We learned that yesterday, but here's the question, but where did it come from? And we can't just say Britain. We want to be more precise than that. But of course, at the time, Napoleon was doing it, George Washington was doing it, all these important people around the world, or certainly in Europe and other places, were doing it because they thought it was classy. If you're classy, you have class. You have good breeding, good manners. You were raised right. You stand up when ladies come in. You know which knife and fork to use at a fancy dinner. You know, that kind of thing. You have really good manners. manners and you were raised well by, your parents or something like that.
Yeah, so this pose was intended to impress. We use the verb intend to mean having the intention to do something. You're doing this on purpose. This pose didn't just make people think you were cool by accident. No, it's a deliberate thing. You're doing it with a reason, with a goal, a purpose, an intention to do this thing. In this case, impress someone.
That's right. That was your goal. Your intention was to impress someone. To impress someone is to do or behave or, have things happen in a way that another person looks at that and goes, wow, that's pretty good. Maybe I wasn't expecting so good, but you did even better. So I lift my hat to you. I say, well done. I say, good job. And, I'm kind of surprised. And maybe my respect for you goes up a little bit. When you go to a job interview, you want to impress your new boss, right? You want to make them go, that person's really smart, and I think they'd be a good worker for our company. I'm definitely hiring them. If you're a young man or a young woman and you're going to your boyfriend or girlfriend's house to meet their parents for the first time, you might want to wear your best clothes and have your best behavior on hand because you want to impress them. You want them to go, my son or daughter is dating a really nice person. I think that's good. I'm really impressed. For example, Rachel really impressed the audience with her singing. She didn't look like a superstar, but man, when she opened her mouth, she sounded like one of the best singers they'd ever heard. They were super impressed.
Okay, so where did this pose come from? The article says, despite becoming popular in the 18th century, as we know, the conclusion is that it was first used in the classical period. We'll explain what that means in just a moment, but first let's talk about the way we're using the word conclusion. So we can use conclusion to mean the end of something, the last part of an article and so on, but here we're using the word to mean the final decision, the final judgment, the final opinion when we've considered all the facts, we've discussed all the different important details, we've gone, okay, after thinking about that, this is our conclusion. This is our final opinion. That's what we mean here. People have thought about this pose, looked at the history, looked at old pictures, and they've decided, okay, it's from the classical period. Final answer. Here's another example. Walter came to the conclusion that he couldn't afford to go to Europe for his holiday this year. So the conclusion here, presumably of experts who studied it, said it's from the classical period.
The classical period, not to be confused with classical music, right, which is Beethoven, Mozart. No. The classical period of history, when we use it this way, is from about 1,000 years before that, or more, 2,000 years before that. This is the period of ancient Greece, when we think of Aristotle and Socrates, when they were building the Acropolis and the Parthenon, when we think of the movie 300 with the Spartans battling the Persians, that kind of time, even before the Romans came along. So people in those sort of sheets that they would wear, and sometimes they would stand like this when they would make speeches. This, of course, is in Greece in the 400, 500, 300, 400, 500, 600 BC, so a very, very long time ago. And there's one person from that time who actually made this pose, or this position, this habit of putting their hand in their clothing very popular.
Yeah, we read in the article that Aeschines, an orator, claimed that people who spoke with their arm outside their tunic were rude.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that's not a good thing to do. So Aeschines, he was born in Athens, he was a political leader, and he was also an orator. An orator is a public speaker who is skilled at getting people to believe or agree with them. A great speaker. The kind of person who would stand up in front of a crowd, give a big speech, and they'd all go, yeah, he's right. We ought to make him our leader, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but not necessarily a politician. If you're a good orator, you could also be a good lawyer, or just the kind of person who does TED Talks.
Yes.
People watch them online. People just like listening to you speak. You have a nice voice. You speak well. Of course, you have something interesting to say, but really, it's entertaining just to hear this person talk about something. Anyways, back then, or back in the article, we also have this verb to claim. To claim something is basically to say something is true or a fact but you don't necessarily have proof or evidence right there with you. You're saying it's true, you might have many reasons it's true. If you're a good orator, at the end of your speech, a lot of people might say, oh, I believe that guy, I think what he said is the truth. But it might not necessarily be. Someone who's caught for a crime might claim, I wasn't at that bank, I didn't steal that money. But maybe they did. But they're claiming, they're saying that this is the truth. But of course, the facts might not agree. For example, Jimmy claims that he is a better baseball player than Shohei Ohtani. I'm not sure he's right.
Probably
he claims
not.
it,
yeah,
but he doesn't play professional baseball, so no. I doubt his claim.
So Eschines claimed that if you spoke with your arm outside your tunic, that was rude. What's a tunic? Well, it is a loose item of clothing. It covered the chest, it would go down to the knees. If you think of what the ancient Greeks and Romans wore across their bodies, that is their tunic.
All right, and it's likely that 18th century artists borrowed this idea because of a lot of those classical writers. People still read what they wrote a long time ago, so maybe the artists were reading this and said, oh, this guy thinks that this is a nice pose from back then. We're just going to do the same thing because we kind of agree. It kind of shows that you're modest, but also powerful.
Now, the article says there are other thoughts on its origins too. The pose's origins.
All right.
People have other ideas about it, though these are believed to be false. So, as with a lot of things, different theories get put out, especially social media, people doing this. And, if you look online and say, what does this pose mean? There's one common theory and idea that will turn up a lot. Like, I know what's going on here. But this is believed to be false.
Okay.
What are these ideas?
It says, well, one theory is that a Freemason may put their hands onto their heart. Very interesting. The Freemasons. That's an interesting theory. And a theory, it's kind of like a claim, you could say, but basically a theory is an idea or an opinion that someone thinks is true, but they don't really have proof. Scientists will do this, right? They'll think of something and say, hey, I bet you that's true. But then the rest of the scientific world doesn't go, oh, okay, yeah, that's true. No, you have to have the theory, and then you have to prove it's true by having evidence, by doing tests and experiments, and having the numbers that show that your theory, your idea of how something works or how to explain something is actually true. And then your theory becomes a fact. But before you have the evidence, it's just a good guess, it's a theory. For example, the theory that the Earth is flat is 100% wrong. Yeah, that's not a good theory.
So the theory is that people doing this pose were it was a Freemason thing. Okay. The Freemasons, this is a secret society, maybe these days slightly less secret. A lot of people might have heard of them.
Yeah.
Originally, it was groups of people who worked with stone. That's what a Mason is. And they would group together to support each other and make sure they all got paid the same and work together as like a workers' union kind of thing. And it's believed they had a lot of power and influence and, could buy politicians and get them to do stuff kind of secretly and behind the scenes.
That's right. It could have just been a men's club for men to get together away from their wives and complain about having to do the dishes, or it could have been a secret group of people who were really controlling the world. But it's true that a lot of the people who started America, for example, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, many of them were Freemasons, so there's always been a bit of mystery about this group. But I think the truth is probably a lot more boring than the mystery. But anyways, it says this discreetly signals, according to this theory, this pose discreetly signals that they're a member of the Freemasons. It's kind of like a secret code or something like that. They discreetly do it. When you do something discreetly, or you are discreet, to use the adjective, it means you're kind of being secret, you're being subtle, you're not shouting out what you're doing. If you wink at someone, or if you're in a place and you both kind of go with your eyes and look towards the door, you're discreetly saying, hey, do you want to go? Let's leave now, or something like that. You're not saying, hey, do you want to leave? No, you're doing it kind of quietly, but certainly not using, secret signals or codes, but in a way that it's not completely clear to everyone around what you're doing.
And you do this to signal something. So here we're using the word signal as a verb. And to signal something is to show that something is happening or will happen. Think about traffic lights. Red signals that you should stop. Yellow signals that you should slow down. You can go through it if it's safe. Green signals it's time to go. You can signal something to somebody. Like Mike said, you could look towards the door to signal that you want to leave. You could signal to the waiter that you're ready to order just by raising your hand. For example, that bell signals that it's time for our lunch break. It doesn't say lunch break, lunch break, lunch break. It signals it. It gives you a sign that this is what it means. So that's one theory, that it's a group of people in a secret society making a sign that, like, I'm one of you.
Absolutely, but it's a theory. It's what some people are claiming, and as we know, that doesn't mean it's the truth, and it could also mean that someone else has a totally different theory. They claim it means something completely different, and that's the case. As we read, another theory is that one famous English painter, Thomas Hudson, wasn't very good at drawing hands, so he hid them. I like this theory more because I know from some artist friends that hands are actually really hard to draw and make them look natural and not make the fingers look too long. A lot of artists don't really like hands. So I actually think that one makes more sense than the secret Freemason signal. This is basically saying that this artist couldn't do hands well, so he's like, well, if I just ask everyone to hide their hands, I don't have to paint the hands. No one will say, those hands are ugly. Very smart.
However, it's probably not true. The article explains this isn't probable because Hudson wasn't the only painter to use the hand in waistcoat pose. So they were all bad at hands.
Yeah, maybe they were all bad artists.
Okay. Well, we're saying that this wasn't probable.
True.
Probable means the same as likely. It just means something that is very likely to be true. This is a very strong possibility. That's what we think, and what we think is 70-80% true.
Right. Yeah.
But this is not probable, so this is not likely.
Okay.
It's not the case. Here's an example. Hester says that she will try to come to the meeting, but she is so busy that it isn't probable. Means she probably can't make it.
She'll try, but probably not.
Yeah, probable is just the adjective of probably.
Exactly. The hand in waistcoat pose shows how old styles can come back in fashion. There you go. It's something from the classical Greek period, from before BCE years, but of course it came back a couple thousand years later with Napoleon and his friends, and then people did it even later after that. When something comes back, that means it basically returns. It was here before, it went away for some reason, and now it's back. For example, 3D movies came back a few years ago.
Yep.
They had them in the 1950s and 60s and then stopped making them, and then they came back. And then they kind of went away again.
Yeah, country music kind of came back for a little bit, I think, in the States.
Country music never went away.
Okay, then.
I don't know.
Well, anyway, the next part in the article says maybe this pose will be next year's Instagram craze.
We could start it now.
Yeah, come on, TikTokers, let's go.
And everyone's going to say, why do you look like Napoleon? And I'll say, you wait.
Yeah, everyone will be doing it
2023,
soon.
everyone will be doing this.
Yeah, well, then it would be a craze. A craze is an extremely, very, very, very popular, but usually very short-lived or short-lasting trend. It's super popular. Everyone's doing it, but in a couple of months, it's gone.
Oh, it's like a fad.
Yes, F-A-D, fad would be another way to say it. A craze.
Or another way to say it is Pokemon Go.
Yeah, I think some people still play that.
Not
but
many.
Yeah, for a while it was an absolute craze.
That's true.
You know? And it's the same with, books or fashion styles, clothes. Certain things are a craze and you see it everywhere. And then, suddenly it's gone and you just don't see it anymore. Yep. So what do you guys think? Is this a reference to Greek thinkers and orators? Is this a Freemason sign? Is it just saying, we're not the French, we're British? Or is it just because hands are hard to draw? What's the truth here? Nobody knows 100% for sure, but you can certainly see a lot of people using this pose in old pictures. We can't deny that. And we're going to talk about that in today's For You Chat question.
You chat.
So our question today is, how many portraits with the hand in waistcoat pose can you think of?
Gosh.
And what, or rather, I suppose, who are they of?
Well, of course, Napoleon. I can think of 2 or 3 paintings just now where he's got that pose.
Yeah.
I can picture the George Washington one. I know that also Matthew Brady, who was a photographer who took pictures of the U.S. Civil War.
Yes.
He took some, and those were photographs. So that was really interesting because those are maybe 60 years after Napoleon, but the pose was the same, even though now it was a photograph instead of a painting.
Yeah, if you look at, if you go on like Wikipedia or Google photos of the US leaders on both sides of the Civil War, there's a lot of them with their hand in their shirt.
Right, yeah.
And I reckon a lot of them would have maybe kind of thought, oh, Napoleon, that's the guy we want to be.
Could be.
He conquered Europe.
True.
So that, that's a kind of a model who they'd want to copy. But I guess also as a modest pose, I was looking to see, I was sure that there was a photo of Lincoln doing it, but I couldn't find one, so maybe not.
And of course, seeing that one of Stalin in the 1940s, maybe, standing in the same pose, 150 years after Napoleon made it popular. That's also an interesting one.
Yeah, I think that's one of George V, the king of England during the First World War. I think there's a few with him because that would have been sort of early 20th century. A few people would have been doing it, but any you could probably find from the last few hundred years of, particularly you're looking at leaders and generals. I'm not sure if you'd find it so often in portraits of photos of average people on the street.
Possibly not. But yes, if you do just Google hand in waistcoat pose search, you'll see a lot of examples from many different time periods. It's really interesting.
Okay, but that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for watching, everybody. For English for You, I'm Pat.
I'm Mike.
And we'll see you again soon. Ta-ta!
Vocabulary Review.
Impress. Charles impressed his guests with a huge dinner that showed off his great cooking skills. Conclusion. We examined the cause of the project's failure, and our conclusion was that it was badly planned. Claim. Marty claims that his uncle is a famous actor, but no one believes him because he often makes up stories. Theory. Mark has a theory that says that if you work too hard, your work will be of poor quality. Signal. The teacher hit her hand against the table to signal that she was ready to start the class. Probable. It's probable that it will rain later because the sky already looks very gray.
智慧小补帖
Classy. Intend. Tunic. Tunic. Discreetly. Craze.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。 如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net